In this exercise, I'm going to show you how we can create a cool kind of parallax effect, and we're going to be creating a little bit of depth with our page. This is fully responsive, so I can resize my screen, and you'll notice that the effect is still going to work. So let's dive in and see how we can build something like this. My starting HTML is fairly simple. I have a header with a class of hero. It contains an H1, and then I just have a main area that has an H2 and some paragraphs just to generate some other content on the page. In regards to the starting CSS, I have a universal selector, a rule for my body, a general image rule to make my images responsive, and a rule on main which sets a max width of 800 pixels and goes ahead and specifies some margin. We'll begin by creating a rule for our header image. So I'm just going to target header.hero, and we'll go ahead and we're going to specify a background image. I'm going to go ahead and set my background position to bottom, and we'll go ahead and set the background size to cover. In addition, I'm going to add padding of 5 rems, and I'm going to set my min height to about 85 vertical height. This value can really be anything you want it to be, but we need to ensure that we have the space for our type to appear above the part that's going to scroll. So if we go ahead and refresh our page, you can see that this sets the image on my page, and it's taking up a good portion of my page. Let's go ahead and let's style our text. We want this to be fairly large and bold so it really stands out. So I'll go ahead and target that. I'm going to set my text color to white. I'll add a text shadow just to ensure that my text will stand out and pop a little bit. I'm going to set my text align to center. We'll set our font size, and we'll go ahead and use our clamp function so that our text is responsive and it will resize based on the browser size. Let's add a font weight to make sure that this is nice and thick. I'm going to use a font weight of 900. I will set my line height to 1. Text transform is going to be uppercase, and I'm going to use a margin top of 3 rems. In addition, I'm going to specify that my width is 100%. If we save now and we refresh, you can see that our text is going to grow and be much more prevalent on the page. Now, currently when we scroll, the page is just going to scroll as it normally would. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to specify that my H1 has a position of fixed. Now when I save and refresh my page, you will see that our text is going to appear on top of this image, like so. Now this also screwed up the position, and that has to do a little bit with my padding. If my page is wider, it kind of centers the text, but when my page gets more narrow, it is not centering it, and that's because of the padding that we added on our hero. So actually let's remove this. We will be adding this into another element in just a minute, so I'll just get rid of that for now. And you can see that the text is just going to appear above this background image. Now, in order to create this depth within our project and this more of a parallax type of effect, I'm going to need to create another element so that I can hold the mask. And let me actually just show you my graphics that I'm using in this project so you understand how I've set this all up. I went ahead and created my images in Photoshop, and these are the images that I have. So you can see that I have this image called Seascape. Ultimately, I just saved that out as an 8-bit ping, and that contains all of the information. Then I went ahead and I have a layer that I'm calling foreground. And the foreground layer is basically isolating all of this blue portion. So I actually have some other layers on my original image with different shades of blue just to create more depth. But I went ahead and I selected this kind of mid-tone blue. And this is the part of my image that I want to use for the mask. I originally had created this particular artwork in Illustrator, so it made it really easy for me to select the elements that I wanted, and then I just brought them into Photoshop. You could use various selectors within Photoshop to select the area that you want. Once I had this selected, I essentially took this selection and then I just used a select inverse, which basically selected everything else. And then I filled the inverse selection with black. So you can see that my mask invert layer contains this black mask. And we're going to be using the CSS mask property to apply this. But it is important that when you create your shape, you want to go ahead and the mask element should be the area where you want to see the text. So that is why I needed to invert this selection and then create the mask from everything except for the actual shape that I wanted. It's important to make sure that when you create your graphics, the mask element is the same exact size as the original element. You might be tempted just to crop this down because obviously it's just transparent at the bottom. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that the images are the exact same physical size, and that's going to make it much easier to ensure that everything lines up. So I already went ahead and exported this out as a PNG, and then this was also a PNG, and these aren't using very many colors, so the file size is actually fairly small. Now that you understand how I've set up the images, I'm going to jump back into my HTML. We need to create another element that is going to be in between the H1 and the header. So I'm simply going to cut my header, and for this I'll just use a div, and I'll give this a class of header mask, and then inside this I'm just going to place my H1. So if I save now and I refresh, you can see that nothing really changes. It still looks exactly the same. But now we have this additional element, and this is the element that I want to apply the mask to. Let's go back into our CSS. And now that we have that element there, I'm going to make a new selector, and this one's going to be called header mask. And I'm going to set the position of this to absolute. We'll use the inset property, and we'll set this to 0. This is just shorthand, so we can set left, top, right, and bottom all to 0. And then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to use the mask property. Now, I do have another video that I created that talks more in depth about masks, so I'm not going to go into them specifically. If you have never used masks, I would encourage you to go ahead and check out that video, and I'll leave a link in the description below for you in case you want to reference that. So I'm just going to go ahead and specify that the mask, go to my mask invert.png, and we're going to use mask position, and this will just ensure that the mask and the original graphic are going to line up. And then I'm also going to use a mask size of cover. So the mask properties are really similar to our background properties. They basically are using the same sort of syntax. Because I'm using the mask property and currently that is not fully supported, I'm going to need to create some vendor prefixes. So I'll just copy this. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in, and then we'll just go ahead and add our vendor prefixes for WebKit to ensure that this is going to work in Chrome and some of our other browsers. And if we do save the page and we refresh, you're going to see that the text disappears and nothing's really happened. Again, this is something I covered more specifically in my previous video on working with masks. But what we're going to need to do is we need to ensure that we're looking at a live preview of this page. The page basically has to be hosted. So if you're hosting your page, it'll work, but it just doesn't work if you just directly open the file locally on your computer. I am currently using VS Code, and I have the Go Live feature, so I'm just going to go ahead and start that. And that will open up another window, which is going to be creating a live preview. And now when I scroll, you can see that this is kind of working. We definitely have some problems. Our mask does not seem to be entirely lined up, so we'll have to check that out a little bit. But this is now actually displaying the text. And as we scroll, we can see what is going on right here. And the reason that this actually isn't working is because we need to add a position of relative to our header hero. We are using position fixed and position absolute, more importantly, on the mask, but it is currently aligning to the parent element that has position, which in this case is nothing. So it's just going to the body or the HTML. So if we just go up to our header.hero and we add a position of relative and save, you should now see that when you scroll, the mask is lining up perfectly on our image, and this looks really good. It creates this nice kind of depth type of thing and really creates some interest with our web page. And as you can see, using the mask, we can create a really great layering type of effect. As I mentioned before, this is fully responsive, so I can resize my page and it still is going to function and look great no matter what size my screen is. And we will get this type of layering sort of effect. And you can see that the text is just going to slide behind the graphical elements. I hope you like this.